Hi, this is Dr. Kimberley Linert, author of Visualizing Happiness in Every Area of Your Life and host of this podcast, Incredible Life Creator. And today I have with me Dr. Deborah D. Stine. Hey, Debbie.
Hi, how you doing?
Good. I am excited to get into this conversation because we haven't had anyone on doing the unique things you are doing. So I'm very excited. But before we do, I'm going to read just your short bio. And I know you have a very long bio. So I'm going to put the long bio in the show notes. So anybody wants to know all about Debbie, you can read that. But I was going to read a short bio. So, Dr. Deborah D. Stine is the founder of the Science and Technology Policy Academy, which provides independent consulting, policy analysis, program evaluation, freelance writing, teaching, and coaching services. Previously, she served in the Obama White House as an executive director of the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology, a science and technology specialist at the Congressional Research Service, a study director of the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering and Medicine, and as a professor of practice in engineering and public policy at Carnegie Mellon University. And we can keep going on and on because she has all these accolades and things she's done, but I think it'd just be better if you tell us your story. So tell us about you. How does a kid get into all this science stuff?
I'm going to start with my days in high school. So I was lucky. This is in San Antonio, Texas. My father was in the military, so I lived all over the country. But I spent all 4 years of high school in Texas, and I was selected for this NSF sponsored program. That's a National Science Foundation program. That's on that was meant for high school students to kind of teach them how to do research. And it was a really, great program. And my research project, which is sort of my junior, senior year of high school, was on something called microbial degradation of oil. So the idea was is that if when there's an oil spill, say in the Gulf of Mexico, then these little microbes can go and sort of eat up the oil. And this was, really, interesting project. It was something that I cared about because I had been to the Gulf of Mexico many times. And, you go into the water and sometimes you get these little like oil specks and things on your swimsuit, right? So you really know it's like out there. Um, and the thing that I discovered, which has impacted from then the rest of my career, is that it's not enough to like write a research paper, right? Like I could write a paper, I could do a presentation, but if it's only going to a scientific audience, then it's not going to have any impact on society. It's something, it's just like, uh, it just goes into the, like if you remember like the Indiana Jones movie, Ark of Covenant, and there's that thing at the end where the Ark of the Covenant goes into this big giant warehouse with all these boxes. To me, the same thing happens with scientific papers. And you have to be intentional about reaching out to policymakers and the public um, about um, about whatever it is if you want something to happen. In my case, sort of the cleanup of the oil. And from then on, I went and I got my bachelor's, which is in engineering. I came back. That was in California. I came back to Texas. Worked as a field engineer doing air pollution work for 5 years. And then two things happened. One of which is I got involved with the League of Women Voters, and this is my 20s, but I worked on things like Volcanus, which was this big ship that was in the Gulf of Mexico that would burn hazardous waste, right? So again, things like that. So I would write pieces and lobby for that. Something called container deposit legislation, which is where you like put in a nickel when you buy a can of Coke, and then you get the nickel back, things like that. And during those 5 years, and this is as a volunteer for the League of Women Voters, I learned like so much about how politics really work, particularly Texas politics, Texas state politics. Um, and then at the same time, I was sitting in my office as an engineer, a field engineer, going out to sites, and I would see policies that from an engineering standpoint to me made no sense. It was clearly they had been written by people who had never actually been to, say, a refinery. And that led to my long-term career. I got my MBA at the same time. After those 5 years, I decided to go to DC and I got my PhD, which is in policy analysis. And that's where the part you put begins, which is basically I first started working for a trade association, and then I started working for the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, which is a think tank. The Congressional Research Service is also a think tank for Congress. And then I got a call one day to say, "Hey, would you be interested in talking about working for the Obama White House?" And that's when I became an executive director for PCAS, the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology. And then that was like a term appointment, because presidents are only there for so long. And then I became a professor of practice engineering public policy at Carnegie Mellon, which is in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Um, and then when I left there, I looked at going back to DC, being an executive director of some other organization. And I thought, I just don't want that life anymore. And that is what led me um, to found what is today the Science Technology Policy Academy. It's sort of like what was happening is at the same time as I was looking for jobs working for somebody else, I was getting side gigs because people, like as soon as I told them I was leaving Carnegie Mellon, people reached out to me and said, "Hey, we have this project or that project." And I thought, "Hey, I can actually make a living at this." And I've been very lucky, and it took me a bit of time, but basically I started earning at least, if not more, depending on the year, um, what earned as a professor at Carnegie Mellon. And I have a lot more independence. I can work at home. I sit here with my dogs, and are able to cuddle with them. So it's a much better lifestyle. And then I'm also able to do a lot of international travel, which is sort of like one of my big loves.
That is wonderful. So, and it's good that we can change what we're doing as the seasons go on because what we wanted at one time isn't always what we want today. And so it's so important to kind of assess that on a quarterly or at least yearly basis to say, hey, am I happy doing what I'm doing? Because it sounds like you were happy in the beginning and now you changed and you're happy with what you're doing now.
Yeah, I mean, I've been very fortunate, in my career, obviously. And but it's very much the case. When my daughter was, I have one daughter who's now she just turned 27 actually. Um, but at that stage I wanted to do one thing, and at another stage I wanted to do another. And so, you have to, I think, kind of think of your career as a whole like ecosystem, something like what is good for you at the time. And it is sometimes challenging, right? I'm sorry, my dog is groaning behind me.
Mhm.
But it is um, you know, at certain stages of your life, you want to do different things. And so when I'm doing career counseling for people, and I put out a jobs newsletter um, at the sorry, I put a job newsletter out for the about science technology policy jobs, and I see, oh boy, that job looks exciting, or this job looks exciting. I know that I would be qualified for it, but I have to resist and say, no, you enjoy your life the way it is. Keep what it is that you're doing.
Yeah. And that is important to stay focused too, because when you go off trying to do all the things, it's hard to get good at anything for one thing, and then you're scattered and then you start to get exhausted.
Right, right. And my overall mission is the same, which is basically my goal is to help scientists, engineers, and health professionals, have an impact on society with their scientific technical knowledge so that we make wise decisions based on the best information that's available. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't have community engagement and opinions from those who kind of are in the field. But that's kind of like my ultimate mission, right? And there's lots of ways to reach that mission. And one was the work that I did in DC. Some of it was what I did when I was a professor. And I worked at some place called the Scott Institute for Energy Innovation to kind of help people deal with energy kinds of issues. But right now, I think I'm helping people the best way that I can, and I have to kind of resist, or and I shouldn't say just people, but society as a whole. I have to resist my desire for, fame and fortune, so to speak.
Yeah. And when I think of the actual topic you're working on, where you want to get people who are doing research and have this really rich understanding and new discoveries of things. And I think about the personality types who do each thing. So people who tend to do research, they're not always, and I can't say generally, but they're not always people. They like doing their research. They like going into detail. And then I look at the personality type, especially, how we get our news. They would go on and on for 3 hours about one little thing. But when you put news out and you want to put it out to the public, not many people are going to read all that stuff. So it's a totally different personality type that needs to take that and get it out into the public so that people can actually consume it and use it and go, oh, that's cool. So, how do we marry those? How do you get that wonderful research out into the public and get it actually not just into the public, but actually to the point where people want to use it, implement it?
Yeah, so I think that's a lot of what I do in terms of working, with this group of people who work in science and technology, is try to figure out like how they can communicate things. And one, you know, part of it is, as you say, keeping it super short. So one of the things that I do is I help when I do a workshop, for example, I help them prepare a 1 minute policy pitch at the very end. And I actually, by the way, started out. I had this in my book, which is like from expertise to impact. That's you kind of see there in the corner. And I originally the 30-second version. I had a 30-second version and a 1 minute version, and I finally said, okay, well. I think the best we can do is the 30-second version for a lot of people is like 45 seconds, or up to a minute. So that's the first thing you need to do. So um, is realize that you need to figure out what it is that you want people to do differently than they're doing now. And so that is that in the science policy communication business called bottom line up front. So you need one sentence that says, this is what I want you to do. And then the second part of it is having a story, some real life story about how that policy is impacting people's everyday lives. And that's really a key element. It's why, like, if you watch the State of the Union, there is a um, always people like up in the galley area that the president points to and says, "Oh, so and so from this city, this happened to them. They fell down a well and they got rescued by these people." Whatever it is, you need to have a story. And then the other thing that I also teach people is that in science and engineering, we tend to focus on just effectiveness, which is basically the degree to which a societal goal is met. So what can we do to say, like I talked about at the beginning, what can we do to clean up oceans, right? And we'll talk about how effective it is. But from a policymaker standpoint, that's not enough information for me to make a decision. So you need to have what I call the other three E's. So there's four E's total. One is effectiveness, but the second one is efficiency. And that basically is what will get the most bang for the subtle buck. I mean, you have to know how much things cost. You have to know also things about equity. Equity is the fairness of the policy. So who wins and who loses, right? So obviously in the oil spill case, you need to think about like the people who are actually doing the cleanup, but also maybe the oil companies, maybe they had the spill, like what they're doing. And you have to make sure that the policy is fair because as fair as you can get it, because there's always winners and losers. And the last is ease of political acceptability. And that's not about politicians, but the degree to which people oppose or support a policy. Like right now, all over the country, there's data centers, right? And they're being suggested for communities. And some communities embrace it and some communities don't. And sometimes it makes total sense. Like if you're putting a data center in Arizona where it's very dry and the data center doesn't take enough action to reduce water consumption, then it's a big deal, right? These are the things that people need to think about. So I teach people how to analyze for those things. And these four E's, and that really helps them understand things from a policymaker perspective. And what I also tell folks is that, just think about how you make decisions. Like if you're going to buy a house or a car or figure out where you're going to go to college, you know, you, there's a lot of different ways to get transportation other than a car. I mean, you could buy a little mini car or you could buy a big SUV, right? There's lots of options that will be effective getting you from point A to point B. But you have to think about other things. You have to think about how much it costs. You want it, a lot of people will be concerned about equity issues like the environmental impact, or maybe it's no more than, okay, well, if I get a little tiny car, uh, will the grandparents fit in the back seat? Well, is it fair to them or not? And ease of acceptability are the things sometimes that where you're dealing with your family where they might say, oh, I really don't want a purple car, right? They don't want to drive around in a purple car, right? So we all make decisions using these four E's. And the key is understanding that policymakers make the decision the same way. Members of the public on science and technology issues also make it in the same way.
Yeah. So when people in government are making a decision, as opposed to someone making a decision who's in a company, let's say, are they all using the same criteria or is it a different way of looking at things?
Um, I think sort of like in a policymaking sense, right? I think that sort of everybody makes a decision the same way using these four E's. Now, and these four E's, by the way, are not just for me. This is from scientific literature. Like I learned these, as I say, in PhD school. The key is I've sort of formulated them to make them easier for people to understand. Um, and like even in a company, if you think about it, like let's just take like what Google is doing, right? So let's say Google has well, they actually at one point had a motto, I don't know if it's still the same, which is like we do no evil, right? So they already presumably have sort of a theme. But on something like data centers, uh, you know, a lot of them are taking action on their own, right, without a government requirement to do things that are more sustainable
Mm.
related to the data centers. They know that they need to do something. They know it's going to cost them more money, right? So it's not just about the bottom line. It's not just about being, it's not just about being effective and having a data center that works. It's not just being about being efficient in terms of from an economic efficiency standpoint. But they have to also think about those equity issues because they all have sustainability policies. Again, this is voluntary. It's not like the current administration is encouraging sustainability actions. And they also have to think about ease of political acceptability. So when this data center goes into this town, or they want to put in this town, what is that public going to say? So I think these, principles, they really apply to all decisions that are made. Now, sometimes there's going to be more than the four E's.
Mhm.
There might be legal issues, there might be other kinds of things that do it. But at its core, I think, regardless of what decision-making environment in, you focus on those four E's. Now, sometimes, equity, like in other words, it's not necessarily that all four of the E's are equally balanced, right? So that really depends on the decision maker. So a decision maker might say, well, I care much more about efficiency than I do about equity, right? That's again, that's up to the policymaker. But as somebody like myself who is an analyst, my goal is to provide that analysis of those four E's. Again, that's effectiveness, efficiency, equity, ease, applicability to that decision maker, and then it's up to them to decide. So what I do is neutral policy analysis. I won't say, unless it's part of what you want me to do, I won't say you should pick A versus B versus C, because a lot of this is based on like your personal perspective. And the analysis that I prepare for, say, policymaker one versus policymaker two versus an NGO, an non-governmental organization versus a company, that analysis is going to be the same, right? But I know that you will have a different framing for in terms of what the decision is. And if you ask me to make a recommendation to you, then I will ask, well, what is it that you care about? What are your principles? To what extent do you care about this? And then once I understand what it is that they want, then I can say, okay, well, this is the option that I think makes the most sense for you. And I think probably you've engaged in these kind of conversations as well. Like I said, it might be something like, oh, okay, you're buying a new refrigerator. Well, what do you care about, right? What are the different things and features and so forth that you want?
And I wanted to go back to when you're working with people who are in research and they have all this data.
Mhm.
And I've seen I know actually people who they you ask them a question and 10 minutes later you got the answer, but they don't know what they think all the points are important. They don't really know how to prioritize importance to them. It's all important. So the answer couldn't be a one sentence answer. It's a 10-minute answer. So how do you take someone who thinks all the points are important and and lead them through that place where they're coming out with one or two sentences to say, this is what I have and this is how I want you to use it.
Yeah. Yeah. So part of it, just like when somebody's giving a speech or a talk to you want to know about your audience. What is it that they care about? So number one is know your audience, understand what it is that they care about. So I do a lot of work in West Virginia, for example, and I know that in West Virginia, discussions about climate change, things like that, for not all policymakers, but a good number of the policymakers, is not going to be what it is that they are focused on. But if you switch and you talk about what things they do care about, which is flooding, for example, flooding is a very big issue in West Virginia. It wasn't that long ago that hundreds of people lost their lives in flooding in West Virginia. Um, and it impacts, of course, not only loss of life, but also the economy. Sometimes towns just like almost like disappear, because it's so hard to rebuild them. There's lots of issues because West Virginia housing is very inexpensive, that rebuilding it is more expensive than the government will pay for. And so you focus on things that they care about, right? They care about the people of West Virginia. They care about the economy of West Virginia, about job creation, all those things, right? And so when you're talking to somebody about the importance of taking action to reduce the impact of flooding in West Virginia, you don't talk about, okay, well, the reason why you're getting more flooding is because of extreme rain conditions, and those extreme rain conditions are due to climate change. It's true, but that's not what they care about. Instead, you talk about the impact, like have the stories of people in West Virginia, individuals in West Virginia who were impacted by the last flood, whether it's loss of life, whether it's loss of their livelihood, all these different things. And then, when you're looking at the policies, you need to focus on things that they can do something about, right? So they can do something, if you're a member of the West Virginia legislature, about fixing dams or putting in better ways to manage water. That is something that is in their um, jurisdiction. If you talk about other kinds of things, like, I don't know, building houses higher, that may or may not be something they could do anything about.
Got it. So, now I know I'm switching gears again here,
Yeah.
but I know you went from working with someone. to working on your own. And I also know that we talked about when we had a conversation that you're using AI to make that easier. So, how are you using AI? Because AI these days is such a general term. We have all these apps and things, and how are you using AI to make your independent business work better?
Yeah, so yeah, I'm one of those people who are a fan of AI. And I should say, by the way, I also do analysis of AI data centers. I just
Uh-huh.
completed a series of 4 things. So I also know the downsides of data centers. I know a lot about those. But the application of AI from a business standpoint, uh, I use it in lots of different ways. But here's the way that probably maybe most people don't necessarily think about it. And some of this I learned from somebody named Carol Cox, who I think her organization is kind of like speaking your brand, but she came from Silicon Valley, and she has this uh, put together kind of this little package of how to use AI to speak in your own voice. All right. So what I did is I just spent like a Saturday doing this, is I took all my own content, right? So that means my book. It means I took all the things. I have like 4 newsletters on LinkedIn. I took all the content of those newsletters. Um, things that like I also do like a co-working space for people who are looking for jobs. So I took the transcriptions of all of those things. So you can imagine a lot of us have a lot of content. And so I put it all together in something called a RAG, which is a retrieval tool, which basically will extract things. It kind of gets to know who you are, and it can sort of extract things. So that's sort of like with step one. The second thing I did is I used, and I, by the way, use different AI tools depending on what I'm doing. If I'm doing analysis, I use Perplexity. If I'm doing something that's more written, I tend to use Chat GPT. And so in ChatGPT, I have a very, very long prompt that gives guidance as to how I want something to be written. Um, and then what I do is one of my uh, newsletters I have is it's called Dear Debbie, and people ask me questions, related to looking for a job in science and technology policy, and all I have to do is I'll take a question, say from the co-working space, the people I work with who are typically, coaching clients. I'll take one of their questions and I will put just literally like maybe 5 words about what their question is. I put it in this tool, then it goes and then it uses something called make, and it will take the information from based on my knowledge base, right? And then it will write the first draft of my Dear Debbie newsletter. And it will do this in like 1 or 2 minutes. And then it only takes me, like maybe say 30 minutes to kind of review it, revise it, add nuances, things that I might have. But the key is it knows my voice, right? And it's not generic content, right? It is something that is related to my world of science, technology, policy, and it's based on what it is that I would say. And doing something like that, just saves me like so much time, right? For things that are really more, I would call like, say, public service kinds of things. Now, that being said, I have also this other newsletter, which is more focused on my personal opinion on public policy, on science technology policy that I do based on current news and affairs. Okay. That I cannot use AI for that at all, really. It's all just kind of out of my head. But once I write it, it can go again into this tool where I upload it, and then I can use it. So I actually I was doing an interview the other day with the Science magazine, and they were asking me sort of my opinions on stuff. And so, I asked, went back and I asked ChatGPT with some of the stuff in there. I said, well, what, what would, based on all that you know about me, what would you say that I would say about this? About this question that this reporter was asking me. And it came up with, a pretty good list of bullet points, right? Now I could have come up with that list of bullet points myself, but I'm not sure if I would have done as good a job, right? And I'm not sure if I would have done it as quickly. So I think the important thing to understand is with AI tools that a lot of people use it just to ask questions, but it can be used for a lot more than that, including generation, of content that um, for things that you're not paid for, basically, the marketing kinds of things. Which, as I say, to people, I'm an engineer, I'm not a marketer, but I know I have to do marketing. Um, and the other thing that's really useful, and this is something I learned from a guy named Danny Enny, who runs an organization called Miracy, which I have worked with off and on over the years, um, to kind of better understand how to market my business, is you need to think about also it as AI as a way to develop strategy, right? So, for example, I decided to put together a catalog of the workshops that I do. Well, I was amazed to find out I have done 40 different topics for workshops since I started my business. I mean, I always thought, oh, I only do a handful, but once I started doing them, I was, oh my goodness, there's 40. So I went and I worked with somebody. And then the thing is, okay, well, what is my strategy for getting this catalog of all my workshops out to people who would be interested in investing in my workshops? So rather than, say typing into ChatGPT, I mean, which by the way, it's important to know that ChatGPT remembers things about you. Not all of the AI things out there do, like Perplexity and Claude and so forth. They all do. But with ChatGPT, it'll remember things about you. And so rather than saying, okay, what strategy should I use for marketing my catalog? And instead, what I said was, ask me questions that you need the answers to in order to develop a marketing strategy for the workshops that are in my catalog. And ask me each question one at a time, wait for my response, and do not develop a plan until I tell you to develop a strategy. And you will get a much better response if you do something like that, where the AI is asking you questions instead of you asking it questions. And like I said, I learned, lots of times I find is I kind of know these things, but I need like these marketing gurus out there, again, which I'm not one, to kind of say, oh, well, what about you if you did it this way, Debbie? And I try and I said, you're right. This really works so much better. And then I asked it to do, once I, developed a strategy and it said, okay, well, here's people you should market to. I then said, okay, develop a database of organizations that you think I should email my catalog to, and identify the name of somebody to send it to and their email address, and um, develop a draft email that I could send to them. And I did that too. Now, was it perfect? No. What I did is after it generated that database, I asked one of my virtual assistants, I said, okay, here's what ChatGPT came up with. Please go to each of these websites, because that was one of the things I also asked to be part of it. Check to see, is this the right person? Is this the right email? All these different things. But the thing is that my virtual assistant could not have come up with as good a list as ChatGPT did, right? So with everything related to AI, you can't, to Gen AI really, which is called generative AI, that's really what we're talking about here. You can never trust it. That's the fundamental thing. But what I also tell people is you also can't trust yourself, and you can't also trust the people who work through you. I have had a million interns, fellows, things like that. And I can't trust them either, right? And so the key that you have to think about is will it in the end save you time and will it save you money? And if it will do those things, then, AI tools can really, really help you. And the other thing I tell people, because I give workshops on this topic, like how to use AI for both analysis and all the things that I talked about earlier about like when I'm teaching people how to do these things, is everything still needs to be in your own voice, right? But what I teach, as I mentioned earlier, is neutral policy analysis, and we are all biased. And so one way to help reduce that bias is to have like a peer reviewer. And when you're a solo entrepreneur, like myself, I don't have the peers around me I used to have when I, worked for 30 some years in DC, right? There's nobody I can go to and say, can you take a look at this? Am I missing something or whatever? So it's really helpful to have it not only as a tool for skills you don't have, like marketing in my case, but also for skills that I do have to say, okay, well, am I missing anything here? Does this look biased to you? What is there something else I should be thinking about? And it will come up with stuff. And for that kind of activity, I will use Perplexity instead of ChatGPT. And the reason why I use Perplexity is every sentence that you have in Perplexity, when it gives a bullet or whatever, they will give a link to the original source. That's not true for ChatGPT. And ChatGPT has gone in and out on the degree to which they provide a source of information for whatever it is that they produce. At one point, they were pretty good, and then they backed off or whatever. It changes, I swear, like every month. But as of today, Perplexity is good. If I'm doing something where somebody's asked me to do analysis that, okay, I really want things that are only scientific literature, I can also tell Perplexity only look at scientific literature, only look at things from scientific sources. Or there's another tool called Elicit, which is really primarily scientific literature, right? And so you have to kind of know which Gen AI tool to use for what purpose. And by the way, it's important to know that I have the pro versions of these, but they're still only like 20 bucks a month. Like I pay my virtual assistants like $40 an hour, right? So the degree to which they can, I still use my virtual assistants for all sorts of different things, but the degree to which um, I can like clarify my instructions to them is really good. And the way I can reduce time for skills that they don't have, right, is really important.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm going to change to personal. So with this newfound independence, you've been able to travel, and recently it was to Africa. So tell us about that. Did you discover anything new? What was exciting? What was interesting? What did you love about just being able to go do that trip?
Yeah. Well, to me, one of the big advantages and why I resist like working full time for, sorry, for anybody else is my ability to do international travel for long periods of time. Like, most of the time we're talking about 3 to 4 weeks. And throughout my career, I never could have traveled for 3 to 4 weeks, like anywhere in the world. And so since the pandemic, I have gone to, because I've tried to do like 2 trips a year. But I've gone to, say, the Galapagos, which I always wanted to go to. I went to Antarctica. I went to Egypt and Jordan. And my most recent trip, which I just got back from a couple of weeks ago, was Southern Africa. And so I went to South Africa, to Cape Town, and then I kind of joined on my own. I joined a group of people, and then I went to Johannesburg, and then to Botswana, Zimbabwe, Zambia, and Madagascar. And I'm somebody who just loves a couple things. I love animals, right? So like I made a special trip to Madagascar. Again, this Madagascar portion was again on my own for a whole week because I wanted to see lemurs, which was like, really like fantastic. Um, and I also like to learn about different cultures. Like it was really interesting, for example, that in not in South Africa, but in the other countries I visited, everybody walks everywhere. Like when I was in Madagascar, they brought me to a local market, and we picked up people along the way, and the guides told me if we just happened to be not happen to be going there because they were taking me, these folks would have walked 2 hours to try to sell their goods and then take those same goods and walk 2 hours back. And that is just so different, right? Um, they were the transportation was like a mix between things where literally it was cars as we would see them today, most of the time that were secondhand, and a cart with ox driving along with goods, right? So I really think that it's important to do international travel to kind of get yourself out of your own world. And sometimes, I'm just kind of happy to leave the United States for a while. When I went to Egypt, like I left on election day. When I went to Antarctica, Trump had started doing all the shutdowns of science technology activities, cutting funding and things like that, which is, of course, for me, very depressing. This most recent time, was during the government shutdown. Or that I was in Southern Africa. And when you, it's not that I don't keep in touch with my business at all. I do monitor email. Even when I was in Antarctica, I was able to like monitor my email. And when you're on a ship, which is what you do in Antarctica, you have a lot of downtime as well as exploration time.
Mhm.
Um, but it really, sort of is a break. It's something I look forward to. I plan my vacations basically around a year in advance. So right now, I'm trying to figure out for fall of 2026, will I go to New Zealand or will I go to Thailand and sort of in Southeast Asia? And for me, that's the reason I work. And when I think about how much the trips cost, I always kind of work it on like what I get paid for, say, like a workshop. Right. So I think, okay, well, if it's going to cost, I don't know, let's just say $10,000. Okay, well, that's like X number of workshops
Mhm.
that I need to do. Most of my income is from analysis more than the other things I do, like career coaching, for example. That's something
Mhm.
an area of business I've really beefed up over the past year. But yeah, that's sort of the way I try to think about things. And as you get older, as which is in my case, you really realize how much little time you have left as you see colleagues pass away that that you grew up with, so to speak. You started working with them, and you were all the same age, and now they're no longer with us. And also from a health perspective, there's only international travel is takes a lot of energy, drive, the ability to walk certain places, and something can happen to you at any time, and all of a sudden, from a health perspective, you have to stop traveling. So I'm trying to get in as much in as I can. When I went to Antarctica, that was my seventh continent. Again, that was like March of this year. And for me, after that, anything more that I can do is just like a bonus, right? I sort of feel like I've reached my goal to make it to all the different continents, and I've really been focusing primarily on going to the global south because I've been pretty much in the north, I've been to like pretty much everywhere in Europe. I've been to the places in Asia I'm willing to go to, and like I've been to Japan a couple times. Um, Back in the olden days when I was uh, worked for other people, sometimes I would have a chance to get a free trip to someplace, and then I would kind of like be able to take advantage of that to go to wherever it is that I was going. But country conditions can change too. Like I was actually supposed to get a free trip to Russia uh, to that would have been going to Siberia to look at a aluminum manufacturing plant that they said was sustainable. But it happened like just before the pandemic, right? So the trip was canceled. And I thought, well, good. I don't, want to do that. And then, of course, Putin invades Ukraine, and now I don't want to go to Russia at all.
Mhm.
And So that's the other thing that can happen is political conditions are also a really big factor. I look at the Middle East. Like when I went to Egypt, which was about a year ago, people said, "Oh, why are you going? All these things are happening between Egypt and Israel." And I said, "No, I'll take a chance." And people always warn me about, oh, like, will it be safe? Will it be dangerous? I have never ever had a problem in any of the countries that I have visited. Instead, it's always been wonderful people, enjoyable experiences, but a lot of it is within you and your ability to live with conditions that are very different than what you have at home.
That makes sense. So now I would like you to tell people, how do they find you? How do they connect with you? You did mention LinkedIn, and I know you have newsletters and all sorts of things. So this is the kind of advertisement part. Tell us what services you have. How do we get a hold of you?
Okay, yeah. Um, so the best place to really interact with me is LinkedIn. It's really the only social media I use at all anymore. And I'm very, very active there. So if you go to Deborah D. Stine, Deborah, and then D, and then Stine, feel free to reach out to connect with me, ask me additional questions, and things like that. If you're interested in science and technology policy. Uh, my book, which came out, I guess now it's going to be maybe almost 2 years ago now, is called From Expertise to Impact. And you can go to Amazon and you'll see it there. But also, like, of course, on LinkedIn, you will also be able to find it. For the my main thing, which is the Science Technology Policy Academy, which is SciTech Policy Academy, all smushed together.com. That is where you will sort of see all the different things that I do, which is, like I says, analysis, coaching. I help people with like what I call like mega proposals for strategies, the ones that are worth tens or hundreds of millions of dollars. Uh, and right now, a lot of what I'm doing is coaching, career coaching for people. And I do that for people looking for jobs, for leadership positions, for people who are like myself, who come from either, say, an academic or sci-tech background, who are interested in forming their own consulting companies. That's sort of the coaching services that I provide. And the on LinkedIn, the four LinkedIn newsletters that I have, one which is called Inform and Influence, which is based on the subtitle for my book. That's the one that's the opinion newsletter. So if you care about what I think about what's happening about science and technology policy, that's where to go. I also have a summary, pictures from my Africa experiences that are there. Um, then I have for people who are looking for jobs, every Friday I put out a newsletter with over 100 jobs that are in science and technology policy. And it's everything from internships to senior positions, not just the United States, it's from all over the world. And the way I do it is I collect them from LinkedIn posts. So the reason why that's important is you know that they're like real jobs. And they're not, because there's a lot of jobs on LinkedIn that are not real jobs. So these are from post, not the LinkedIn jobs section. And then, as I mentioned, I have this Dear Debbie thing where I answer questions, related to science, technology, policy. And then I have something which I called SciTech Policy 101. And what I've done there is I have I started out just as a summer project with little videos that are like 5 minutes or so. That's kind of like a brief summary of what's in each chapter of the book. And that was popular. And so I now, remember I told you I had 40 workshops. So now each week I'm putting up a little like 5-minute video about the workshops I offer. So say it's on community engagement. I'll write something, say, well, here's how community engagement applies to something that's happening today, like a current event. Then I have a 5-minute video, and then ultimately I hope that people then will book me to do these workshops. Um, and I would say that, I mean, I've talked about a couple of the people who have helped me along the way. Like one of the ones on LinkedIn is Sophie Leschner. She helped me develop sort of like a LinkedIn profile and strategy that has worked well for me so that like I had these LinkedIn newsletters. I have like, I think maybe 3,000, 3,500 people for the jobs newsletter. All the other ones are like over 1,000 people because my goal was to try to reach people who didn't know me already. And so for me, these like newsletters and other things that I've done on LinkedIn have really, like with her help, proven to be a really good way for me to increase my visibility, beyond because the further I got from DC, the more new people come in DC, and so it's new faces that need to know who I am, right? And I'm sure that probably happens to lots of other people as well.
Yeah, it's everything's always changing. So,
Yes, exactly. I mean, that's the one thing, I have learned since it's now been about 8 or 10 years that I became a independent like entrepreneur, is that you constantly have to change things. Like uh for a while there, I was doing a lot of classes, like online classes, and they were, popular. And then after the pandemic, I think people just got burned out. And what made me feel better, and this is why I like to participate in some of these groups, is I found it's happening to everybody. It wasn't just like me, like, oh, people don't like me anymore. No, no, it's just that the people were just like, we want things in person. So then I started traveling again. And so now, like when I give workshops, people are able to come up with the money to fly me from Pittsburgh to wherever it is. And it's great to do them in person, and do them. And so I stopped offering classes and went to workshops instead. There you go.
wonderful. Well, now I have a personal question, and you might have already answered it with the travel, but what gives you the most happiness and fulfillment in your life at this point?
Well, I think, obviously travel is like a big part of it. But one thing that I sort of mentioned earlier, and you kind of heard her complaining, is I like to be just sitting at home with my dogs, right? So I love terriers. I have Princess Leia is a Scottish Terrier. And then I have Ray, and she's a Cairn Terrier. Cairn Terrier is like Toto the Wizard of Oz. And they sit here, they can drive me a bit crazy sometimes, but it's really nice to kind of work in peace, to have my sort of dogs with me. I can look outside, I can watch birds. It's a beautiful snowy day here in Pittsburgh. Um, and one of the decisions I made was I'm not going to employ anybody. In other words, I'm not going to try to be bigger than I am. I want to stay as a solo entrepreneur. I was a manager for years and years. I don't want to deal with other people's problems, all these different things. But I still want to interact with people. And the thing here, the benefit I have is I now only interact with people that I want to interact with, right? I don't have to, if somebody, like doesn't appeal to me, for whatever reason, like, I don't know, maybe as a coaching client, honestly, I'm sorry, I don't think I can help you. And I move
Mhm.
on, right? Um, so I think having that independence, and also, uh, I guess that the final thing I would say is, you know, spending again 30 some years in DC, I was not able to actually always express my personal opinion, right? Because I was the representative of the organization. Whether it's the National Academy of Sciences or Congress or the White House, you have to be very, very careful as to what you say, and even what questions you ask, and even what places you go to. Um, and one reason I started my opinion letter, which was pre-Trump, like I started before that, was because I thought, hey, the worst that's going to happen to me if somebody doesn't like what I say is they're not going to hire me for some activity. And although that's disappointing, I'm at the stage that, I don't expect everybody to like me. I don't expect everybody to like my views. And as you get older, you're much more willing to accept that that's just the way the world is. Just like you don't like everybody,
Mhm.
everybody's not going to like you. And I was willing to take and continue to be willing to take that risk because some of the things that I write are much more. radical than maybe the broader science and technology community would want. Like, I think the universities are need to do a better job than what they're doing now in terms of supporting their PhD students and helping them develop the skills they need to get jobs. And my career has been focused on what's called in the business truth to power. And in the past, that truth to power was through the committees of experts and organizations that I worked with. Now, the truth to power is me as an individual, sort of speaking back sometimes to those same organizations.
Yeah. And it's wonderful that you're doing that and you have the courage to do that because we need to hear those things. We need to be woken up to at least a new, different idea or new way of looking at things, even if it just gets us thinking, even if we don't agree, if it just gets us thinking, it's
Well,
so
that's
powerful.
exactly it. Is that, as I tell people, no policy is perfect, right? That's the thing you learn the most about public policy. Public policy takes a long time to happen, and no
Mhm.
policy is perfect. But you, as a decision maker, need to be willing to consider new ideas, to consider maybe what you're doing could be done differently. I always used to, but when I used to work with a lot of these expert committees, I didn't always agree necessarily with what they said, but that's okay. I mean, in the end, 5 years later, we'll see, oh, was I right or was they right? Yeah, whatever. But everybody just has to be open to new ideas. And I was lucky to work with a lot of experts. So that when I said something, well, what if you thought about this? And they would say, that's a good idea, Debbie. Or they say, of course, they might also say, oh, Debbie, that's the dumbest idea ever. But that's okay, as long as they're willing to listen and consider.
That's beautiful. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. And we could just talk all day, but it has to come to an end at a certain point. So thank you so much.
Sure, I really appreciate it. And, it's great to kind of talk to people outside my world and to kind of explain what it is that I do, because, that's my mission as well. My mission is not just to teach others, like in the science and tech world, but hopefully to encourage others outside science and tech to be listening to what we have to say.
Yeah. So I have one last question. What is your best advice on living an incredible, amazing life?
I think to me, it's always, be true to yourself. Uh, as somebody who does, again, a lot of career coaching, oftentimes I see people doing and taking actions based on what other people, what other people think they should do, right? Not what they themselves really want to do. And even when I was in engineering school, we started out, this is the University of California at Irvine. There was like 400 people who entered engineering. By the end of the second year, the sophomore year, there only 200 were left. And why did that happen? It was because a lot of the people went into engineering because they did not have a passion for the field. They did it because, a parent, a relative, somebody said, engineering, you can go and get the degree and make a lot of money and this and that thing, but they didn't really have a passion for it, right? So you always want to do things that you are passionate about. I have been passionate about science and technology since I was a very young kid. It was always going to be my path. And I was actually talking to one of my coaching clients the other day who has a PhD in the life sciences, and she's doing, she's looking for a job. She has a job, but she's looking for something different, whatever. But I asked people at the beginning of like the coworker calls for their celebrations, that her celebration was finally saying, I am working on my passion project, right? And whatever your passion project is, that's what you should do. And life is short, you know, you gotta make it worthwhile.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Debbie.
Thanks. It was great.
We'll talk to you again soon.
Okay. Bye bye.